begin with my remarks and yeah, proceed with the people we have, and then as the others join in, we can do it later. Yeah.
Sure.
I'm told that people can see our conversation, so it's
Yes,
just
exactly.
Okay.
Um, so I am starting. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to those joining us from around the world. Welcome to our World Day Against Trafficking in Persons event entitled Eradicating Demand to Eliminate Human Trafficking. My name is Tatiana Kotlarenko, and I'm honored to serve as your moderator today. I'm a member of the G20 Interfaith Forum Advisory Group on Human Trafficking and a longtime advocate in centering survivors in anti-trafficking policy and prevention. This hybrid event brings together survivor leaders, scholars, advocates, and UN leaders to address the core driver of trafficking, demand. I would like now to invite Ruchira Gupta, who is the founder of Apniap and the author of I Kick and Fly, and now a new incredible book that is going to be launched shortly, to provide us her opening remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here today with all of you. We are a dedicated community which has been working for decades to end human trafficking and create a world in which no human being, especially children, are bought and sold. I'm the founder of Apne Aap. As many of you know, Apne Aap is a grassroots organization in India which helps to end sex trafficking girl by girl. We run community centers in red light areas, and we make sure that girls who are trapped in intergenerational prostitution, that is, tribes, where prostitution is passed down from mother to daughter, get into school. We file cases against traffickers and create exit options for women to link to livelihoods and bank accounts. We have been doing this for more than 3 decades. And in the UN here in New York, we work with interns and New York University to make sure that we can create the next generation of activists. Today, we are very happy to co-host this event with the United Nations Office for Drugs and Crime, UN Women Vital Voices, and the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women as we mark the World Day Against Trafficking in Persons. Along with the organizations who are hosting the event, we also have partner organizations who I'm very, very proud to partner with, and they are from France, from Europe, the European Women Migrants Network, the Coalition to Abolish Prostitution, the Mediators Beyond Borders, Teach, Train, Transform International, and all of these have come together to mark this day. This is not just another day in the UN calendar. It is a day to remember the lives stolen, the systems that failed them, and the possibility that change is still in our hands. We should not give up, even though you must have heard us all talking about the grim scenario we face today. One of the things that I want to focus on in today's panel and remarks will focus on today as we mark this important day is the demand that drives it. Human trafficking is not an accident, it's a market. And like all markets, it is driven by demand for cheap labor, for sexual exploitation, for the bodies of women and children who are seen not as human, but as commodities. This demand thrives in inequality, gender inequality, of course, caste inequality in India, race inequality right here in America and many other parts of the world, sometimes ethnic inequality. And then, of course, it feeds off conflict, migration, poverty, and most importantly, sexism and patriarchy. And it grows stronger when we stay silent. I also want to sound an alarm today that one of those populations and communities who are most in danger in today's world right now, as I speak, are migrant children. They are more vulnerable than ever. According to a recent US memo, over 18 million children, that is 1 in 4 in America, are now at risk of deportation. They are being sent back to the very dangers they ran away from, or live in or they are living in fear, or will go into hiding because they're scared of being deported or their family members deported. Every time we criminalize migration, we offer traffickers an opportunity because there is a demand for these children and there is organized crime which wants to make a profit and they prey upon the most vulnerable. So every time a law or policy or the failure of a law or policy happens, then the most vulnerable get more into danger. Today's program is stellar. We have Mira Sorvino, who is an acclaimed actress, and she will be making remarks. There are two experts from the United Nations who will talk about what the UN is doing to combat human trafficking. And then we have a panel of experts who have literally been devoting their lives for decades and decades to fighting human trafficking. And along with that, we have student interns from an NGO, Apne Aap, who will share a theatrical reading from my debut novel. Not a debut novel, it's my second novel, The Freedom Seeker. And it's not a curtain raiser or a performance, it's a glimpse into the emotional and moral truth of what children endure when they are forced to cross borders alone and when they are put into dangers where traffickers can prey upon. The story follows a 12-year-old girl from India who wants to just basically reunite with her family in Queens. It's fiction, but it's true. And I want to really end my remarks by talking about not just the scale of the problem. You know, we can talk about numbers. It's almost 50 million people are trapped in situations of trafficking across our world right now, which is 50 times the population of Manhattan, the city in which the UN is based and where I am right now. Imagine that, all in situations of trafficking. And all of them are in danger because there's somebody who wants to buy them, somebody who wants to exploit them. And they are the ones who fuel and go create the demand for this. And what does happen then is that organized crime steps in, which is the theme today, that how can we stop organized crime from functioning to fuel and abet this demand? What can we do? We can change laws to center survivor voices and reduce demand. We can train officials to identify and protect victims, not punish them. We can support stories that create empathy and understanding. And we can make sure that in places where the law doesn't exist or is being dismantled to address the demand, we keep our voices alive and refuse to look away. Thank you to every survivor, activist, policymaker, and youth advocate who is here today. I can see that we have a large number. Thank you to our UN partners and my fellow organizations and fellow leaders for creating space for this dialogue. And thank you to our students, our daughters, for showing us that courage is contagious. Let's move forward from today with eyes open, hearts lit, and the resolve to end human trafficking in our lifetimes.
Thank you so much, Ruchira, for those powerful opening reflections. Now, I would like to invite two leaders from the UN system who are at the forefront of advancing survivor-centered policy globally. Delphine Chance, who is the director of the UNODC office in New York, as well as Elise Osman, who is the policy specialist at the UN Women for ending violence against women and girls. So Delphine, if we may start with you.
Sorry, thank you very much, Tatiana. Thank you very much, Ruchira, for this very indeed powerful introductory remarks. We just finished right now a UNODC event marking the World Day Against Trafficking in Person, which, as Ruchira was mentioning, is actually focusing on how to dismantle criminal groups because human trafficking is an organized crime phenomenon. And as the guardian of the Palermo Convention, which celebrates this year, this 25th anniversary, and the dedicated protocol really remains the strong basis legal framework, international legal framework, under which all counter trafficking in persons efforts have actually been deployed. And of course, this is a very important international standards, but also very, very relevant as we are, some of us in New York. Important to say that every 4 years there is an appraisal of an international commitment, which is the Global Plan of Action on Human Trafficking. member states adopt a dedicated political declaration. So this is why these events are so important. And thank you very much for extending invitation to the UNODC to join this event. It's very important to really to shed light on some of those important discussion, both in terms of highlighting what are the current trends when it comes to human trafficking, and that's why our event was actually really focusing on forced criminality and those victims were actually forced to engage into that being trafficked and then forced to then themselves compelled to commit crime, which is one of the kind of emerging trends that we've actually noted. But more importantly is really also to discuss policy responses to this. And member states are not alone on this. It's important that it's really an overall multi-stakeholder approach to the fight against human trafficking. So as reflected in the Palermo Convention, our UNODC's efforts to combat trafficking in person as a global fight must be addressed in different fronts. So we must look at how we can really do the proper coordination in the various ongoing work that we're having, both here in New York, but also in Vienna, because there is like an ongoing review of the commitment made by member states and the various dedicated working group on human trafficking, and all this very important work and resolutions that are adopted in Vienna then find their way to New York through our office and of course in cooperation with our partners. So I want to address like two important aspects since we're actually focusing this event on the particularly on the demand, and I see my good friend Tina is on the line, and I'm sure she'll be further elaborating this from the CSO's perspective. But I want to address two from first really encouraging the landscape of the crime of human trafficking, so that really we can develop a targeted response. And this is an area in which ahead of this appraisal of global plan of action, we are UNODC issuing a very important document, which is the global report on human trafficking. This really highlights, it's based on statistics collected from member states on detected victims, on ongoing cases, on completed cases, but also kind of complemented by other various open sources. So this is really a document that really highlights some of the trends, the current trend that we're seeing, and offering some policy recommendations. So this normally is always issued ahead of the political declaration to inform member states what they're negotiating the political declaration. And secondly is really engaging with various partnerships with civil society, with academics, the private sector, and other stakeholders to ensure that the strategy really reflects and is targeted at the reality in the ground. So firstly, how does human trafficking look like today, and what are the tools to eradicate this? So trafficking in person is a very sophisticated crime, and it often involves criminal networks, the use of technology to facilitate crime and evade prosecution, and as well as, because it was very important, it's a lucrative crime. So more and more those criminal groups are actually engaging this because they are raising funds. So they've also noted that they're using a number of cryptocurrency to conceal the proceeds of their crime. So we've produced this. This is like some of the phenomena that we've highlighted in the global report. So in the latest edition of the 2024 global report on human trafficking, we see like a global rise of 20% of the detection of victims in 2022 compared to 2019. In 2022, 61% of the trafficking victims detected worldwide were female. Adult female make up 39% of all detected victims, and girls make up a significant 20% of the total detected victims. These are, of course, alarming figures, and that really kind of show that the prevalence of exploitation and trafficking of women and girls in enduring the challenges that must be addressed. So that's a point that this thing is also important to note, that it's not all victims are the same, and it's very important to really have a very specific, dedicated, tailor-made approach to the victims, to have like various profile of victims, and also having some sort of both gender sensitivity and trauma related policies developed that are really specifically focused on the type of the type of victim and type of trafficking schemes under which women, girls, and male and boys have actually been under. Which really brings me to like the second issue that I wanted to address is the need to meaningfully engage in partnership with the civil society and all the stakeholders, and more importantly, survivors, in creating targeted, effective, victim-centered responses in the fight against human trafficking. So last month in Vienna, we've hosted the first Global Forum for Human Trafficking Survivors, and we've titled Voices of Resilience. This session with survivors in the preparation for this forum really confirmed that the protection responses often fall short and can be disconnected from the experiences of victims. And as a result of this disconnect, current anti-trafficking measures really do not necessarily translate the perspective from the survivors. So this end, the Voice of Resilience Global Forum have issued a call for action for governments and others to adhere to a set of guiding principles in anti-trafficking responses. That really is a way to incorporate the voices of survivors into the policy response. But additionally, we was also engaged in partnership with civil society and stakeholders, such as those that will be intervening after me. So as mentioned before, currently member states are engaging in negotiating the political declaration to really is a way to reaffirm their commitments in the fight against human trafficking. So for those of you, this will actually culminate in November, on 24th of November, in the high-level meeting. Where the political declaration will be adopted. But there is also an opportunity for all stakeholders to provide their own inputs to the political declaration, what they see are the priorities, and really encourage them to publish them on or to provide their inputs to UNODC website, because we have a dedicated webpage in which we are putting all the various inputs from CSOs, and that we're making them available to member states to be able to really for them to better inform them while they're negotiating this political declaration. And I just wanted to shed light to some of the inputs that we've been receiving so far. On the many contributions that we got from various stakeholders. So first, we need to elevate the role of civil society organization as well as members of the community in providing assistance and empowering of victims in trafficking in persons. Second, we need to include youth in conversation where solutions are crafted. They're powerful agents of change with ideas, networks, and psychological fluency to lead meaningful prevention efforts. Third, and actually on the youth, very, very important again, is the connection with the misuse of, the use and misuse of social media, being both misused through scams and of course then forced criminality, but also wonderful platforms in order to really raise awareness about the problem, and that everybody should be engaged and be aware that it can happen to anyone, and anyone can really be the victim of such scams. Third, we need to enhance coordination at all levels to counter trafficking efforts in the fight against sex trafficking. We need to focus on awareness, raising, and support of women and girls. Fourth, we need to leverage technology and AI in the fight against trafficking. While technology is increasingly being misused for the purpose of exploitation by traffickers, it also offers potential solutions in prevention, detection, and prosecution. So these were so far some of the inputs that we've been receiving, but details of some of those contributions, you'll find them on UNODC website. So we facilitate and encourage really this partnership with the stakeholders. And today is, as I said, a celebration of the World Day Against Trafficking. So it's really an opportunity for us to collectively reflect on the emergency of the issue, and to really reaffirm all our strong commitments to kind of put our own little stone in the overall, to actually make an impact. And of course, with the UNODC and together also with all the UN family and starting with my UN Women colleague who will be speaking after me, we stand ready to provide assistance and to also be your voice through the events that we're organizing throughout the year, and particularly in the context of this global forum. And we really hope that you can really make sure that we're here to stand aside you and provide you all the support that you need. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Delphine, and thank you for highlighting the importance of survivor inclusion at the highest level. In my former role at the OSCE, I launched the first International Survivors of Trafficking Advisory Council. I know that Malaika Oringo is working with the UNODC, who was part of that first cohort. And today we have also Jerome Elam, who's here, who was the vice chair of also International Survivors of Trafficking Advisory Council at the OSCE. So thank you so much for really moving this work forward. And now I would like to go to Elise. Elise, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tatiana. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues, friends, and allies. It's an honor to join you today on behalf of UN Women on the World Day Against Trafficking in Persons. And I really wanted to begin by thanking APNIAP Women Worldwide and all of the co-hosting partners for convening this really timely and urgent conversation. Trafficking in women and girls persists as a grave violation of human rights and a stark reflection of deep-rooted gender inequalities and power imbalances. And at its core lies a persistent and often neglected driver, which is the demand that fuels trafficking. International normative frameworks have long recognized that to eradicate trafficking, we must confront demand as a root cause. The Palermo Protocol called upon states to adopt or strengthen legislative and other measures to discourage the demand that fosters all forms of exploitation of persons, especially women and children. And this is not a recommendation, it's a legally binding obligation. More recently, the CEDAW Committee's General Recommendation 38 reaffirmed that failure to address demand is failure to protect women and girls from violence and exploitation. And it made clear that trafficking is a consequence of systemic gender-based discrimination, patriarchal norms and stereotypes, and male sexual entitlement, and calls for comprehensive measures to address the root causes of trafficking. And this includes action to reduce inequalities, to ensure decent work and economic participation of women, safe migration pathways, and robust labour rights protections, as well as educational, social, and cultural measures to discourage demand. This message was echoed again in the 2024 UN General Assembly resolution on trafficking in women and girls, which calls for enhanced prevention measures, intensified efforts to eliminate demand, and strengthened legislative and punitive measures to deter exploiters of trafficked persons, as well as to ensure their accountability. Yet despite this growing recognition of the need to address demand, implementation remains patchy and inconsistent. And the 2024 UN Secretary General report on trafficking in women and girls found limited progress in transformative prevention measures to eradicate trafficking. And the report reminds us of the importance of accelerating efforts to prevent trafficking as a form of violence against women and girls. So building on the recommendations of the Secretary General report, UN Women has identified 6 key priority areas to really move the needle in our global efforts to eradicate trafficking of women and girls. First of all, we need to connect the dots. Trafficking doesn't happen in isolation. It's part of a broader continuum of violence against women and girls. We know that survivors of domestic violence or child sexual abuse and other forms of gender-based violence are often at heightened risk of trafficking. So prevention needs to start with a deeper analysis and understanding of these intersections. Second, we need to step up investments in prevention. Demand thrives where inequalities persist, so we must tackle the root causes of trafficking by transforming harmful masculinities, gender stereotypes, and social norms that condone or normalize violence against women. And prevention requires long-term investment in education, social norm change, and women's economic empowerment. Third, we need to reform justice systems and strengthen support to survivors. Demand flourishes in a climate of impunity, yet justice systems too often punish the exploited while shielding the exploiters. And UNODC data shows that women make up 28% of those investigated for trafficking, but 41% of convictions. And this is a reflection of systemic gender biases across our justice systems. And we must reverse this by holding those who exploit women and girls accountable and applying the principle of non-punishment for survivors, as well as ensuring that survivors have access to survivor-centered trauma-informed services that address not only their immediate needs, but offering long-term support to ensure recovery, dignity, and justice. Next year, the priority theme at CSW is access to justice and will provide us with a renewed opportunity to examine access to justice for survivors of all forms of violence against women and girls, including trafficking. Fourth, we need to adapt to the emerging and complex risks. As Delphine was mentioning, traffickers are adapting fast. Demand is increasingly facilitated through digital technologies, recruiting online, monetizing exploitative content, and exploiting crisis situations from conflicts to climate shocks. Prevention and protection need to be agile and integrated across humanitarian migration sectors, as well as ensuring that there's increased collaboration with the technology sector. Fifth, we need to strengthen data and evidence. You can't fix what you can't see, and yet gender and sex disaggregated data is still very limited. And data to better understand the patterns of exploitation or evidence of what works to prevent trafficking and sexual exploitation remains very scarce. So we must address these evidence gaps to drive more targeted action. And last but not least, we need to center survivor leadership, as has already been said. We should shift from speaking for survivors to working with and being led by them. And this means investing in survivor-led organizations and ensuring survivors have a seat at the table to shape laws, policies, and prevention strategies. UN Women is putting these priorities into action across our work to end violence against women and girls. In Asia and the Pacific region, our Protect program tackles trafficking across the migration cycle by strengthening policy and regional coordination and challenging harmful gender norms that enable exploitation. And in countries such as Guatemala, Timor-Leste, Nigeria, and Ukraine, we're working with governments and civil society to transform justice responses, invest in prevention, and support survivors through inclusive feminist approaches. Colleagues, friends, eradicating trafficking is possible, and let us honor this day not only with words, but with action that's rooted in international law, feminist values, and survivor leadership. Let's build systems that don't wait for women and girls to be trafficked before we act, but rather dismantle the conditions that make trafficking possible at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for reminding us that it is not a choice or a decision whether we want to address demand. Governments across the world have committed to doing so. And I would also like to highlight your remarks specifically on the impact of trafficking on women and girls globally. And it needs to be highlighted over and over and over again, because there needs to be a clear understanding about all forms of violence and how against women and girls and how they connect to vulnerability, to trafficking, and then trafficking itself. Thank you very much. Now I'm delighted to introduce our keynote speaker, Mira Sorvino. Ms. Sorvino is an Academy Award-winning actress, human rights defender, and UNODC Goodwill Ambassador against human trafficking. She has used her global platform to speak out boldly against exploitation and to demand accountability from governments and institutions. Please join me in welcoming Mira Sorvino. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and I'm honored to be a part of this distinguished group. I've partnered with many of you before, and I am really excited to see the momentum building on this World Day Against Trafficking in Persons to make a change. Here is a video about some of the work that the UN Voluntary Trust Fund does supporting an organization in Mexico City. And then one of our panelists, actually Abner, after this is connected to this. So I thought I would show you this because it is very important to highlight the work of the UN Voluntary Trust Fund, on which I serve as one of the board of trustees. So let me play you this video first, and then we will continue talking. Is there sound? We have sound. I sent it to Hudson, yeah. Any luck with the sound?
No sound still. Um, no, sorry, let me try sharing that again. Let
Okay.
me know if you can hear it this time. Share.
Wait, and then share sound here.
Sorry, one second. It seems to be an issue with my computer.
Okay.
Maybe perhaps we could continue with opening remarks and play the video after.
Sure.
Works.
It's fine. I had not planned to start with the video, but it appeared on my screen, so I felt like I should play it. Unless you're ready with the sound now. How's it going?
I have to restart Zoom. Sorry.
Okay. All right. So I'll continue talking. So yes, so that was one of the things that that was not mentioned in my introduction, that for the past 2 years, I have been serving on the UNVTF board. We've convened twice. We just recently had our first mission trip to Mexico City, UNODC, and we visited two of the organizations that we support. For those of you who are unaware, the UNVTF is an incredible tool. It is a fund that creates grants for NGOs across the world. We give money to organizations in over 60 countries, and we've helped over 100,000 victims and survivors regain their lives. And I think ever more important these days, with the dropout of USAID, or our funding capacities from my home country, this is one of the primary ways that we can still keep these life-giving, life-saving services to survivors, which create people who are testaments to the the worth of the human person who is trafficked, and give the public a way to understand the tragic depth of this crime that is occurring all around us. And I have seen so many survivors rise phoenix-like from the ashes of their former circumstances to become powerful, happy, empowered, loving people, brave people, obviously scarred by trauma, but their ability to rebound is absolutely phenomenal. And um, this fund also goes towards organizations working on root causes, working on community building, working on accessing the most marginalized and vulnerable among populations that they serve, to prevent their trafficking or prevent their re-trafficking. One of the things that our funding went to in one of the places that we visited was to hire a social anthropologist who would go and make sure that the places that the victims, the survivors, were being sent after they had graduated this safe house program would be safe landings for them, and they would not be reabsorbed, and that they had communities and families who were now educated and would help support their recovery and their re-entry into society. And as we know, unfortunately, many trafficking victims are family trafficked. In the case of that one shelter, 70% of the girls there had been trafficked by their own mothers. So what we did was phenomenally important and helped start building a culture of prevention through awareness, through education. So I do urge people to learn about the fund, and perhaps consider donating, or encouraging private sector partners to donate to the fund, because it's on our backs now, because there's a real dearth of funding that is really damaging right now across the globe. So, I have been working against human trafficking since 2004, first with Amnesty International, and since 2009 with UNODC. During that time, I've interviewed scores of survivors, and it's really become a gigantic part of my life. And I have to say that since the beginning of this situation, in 2004, people were just waking up to the reality that human trafficking existed, that modern day slavery existed, that what we saw as prostitution systems were really most likely often human trafficking systems, and especially the sexual exploitation of minors. We've seen a shift in the paradigm where we no longer call people child prostitutes or talk about child porn. We talk about sexually exploited children or commercial sexual abuse of, or online sexual abuse of minor material. And we've seen police slowly shift their mandates from arresting the victims of human trafficking to arresting people who exploit them, although that's a very slow hill to climb. And but and I think, many media projects, including some of the ones that I have been involved in, the miniseries Human Trafficking back in the aughts and Sound of Freedom, which became a worldwide phenom, which, although it has some issues with it, also really awoke a lot of empathy across the globe. And I think there is a real disconnect between awareness, because I think now, 2025, many people across the globe understand what human trafficking is or sort of have some idea of it. And many people have a heart for it. Many people have been moved, but no one knows what to do. We haven't activated the power of the average citizen. We have not put enough pressure on our governments. We have not levied the power of the private sector and civil actors working together to really make a meaningful dent in this problem. It is a war, and the traffickers are winning. There are more people living in slavery today than at any other point in recorded human history, and less than 1% get out. So those are dismal statistics. And we do really have to stop looking at it from the point of view of just triage, of just working with people who have gotten out and we're helping them rebuild their lives. And that's fantastic. And it's super important work. But we're getting to people after they've been brutalized, after they've been raped, after they've been maimed, after they've lived a life that wasn't theirs, sometimes for years on end, and had their bodily autonomy taken away from them, their freedom, all their human rights stripped from them. We really do have to work on prevention. We have to work on eliminating demand, both on the labor side and the sex trafficking side. And to that end, I think, two of our panelists today are going to speak very meaningfully about working on the demand side for sexual trafficking. I think Abner and Taina have incredible things to say about meaningful models of harm reduction, meaningful ways to reduce the prevalence of commercial sex buying, because the terminus point of human trafficking, of sex trafficking, is prostitution. So if you reduce the demand for prostitution, you reduce the demand for human trafficked people, because a pimp would far prefer to earn 100% of the earnings of a prostituted person than have to give them a small, to take a small commission off of their work. So whenever possible, a pimp is going to want to prostitute people who are trafficked rather than have free will independent agents who are earning their own money and they only get a small percentage of it. That's just economics in the pimp world. I am going out on a limb. This is my personal opinion. It is not necessarily the personal opinion of UNODC. However, I truly support, the work of CATW on the equality model, and I'm really looking forward to hearing Taina's intervention. And I love what Abner is doing. He works with El Pozo de Vida, which we have the video about our visit to them, but he works specifically on working with men and toxic masculinity and how to heal masculine wounds that are creating this void, which creates this sexual addiction, this need to buy other people's bodies, and then help them heal so that then they can see the harm that they create and shift their behavior. And this is cultural shifting. Both of these are talking about systemic cultural change. And, we see in countries where the equality model has been adopted, a reduction in sex buying, which means a reduction in trafficked victims. And we are seeing in Abner's work, people are changing their behavior and men are changing their behavior. So that for me is really important on the sex trafficking side. Obviously, we have to work on root causes. Obviously, we have so many issues: marginalization, being female, being poor, being from a disadvantaged background or an atmosphere of abuse, or being in the foster care system in our country, or being a migrant. Those statistics are just staggering of, migrant children in the US, how many of them are deported and then they end up alone in a country where, you know, traffickers are always looking for people that they can profit off of. And a child alone is the most vulnerable. But I think we're just looking for a culture shift, and we're looking to engage the public in meaningful ways where they can support legislation and they can vote with their dollars. Perhaps we really need to be more effective at really rooting out the slavery in supply chains for the goods that we buy. And I think really if we can identify the brands that are actually working to be transparent in their supply chains and show us that they have followed their product from inception to the marketplace as not having been touched by slave hands, once again, money talks. So if those companies do better and companies that are exposed for having trafficked labor suffer, I think that we can make a dent. I think we need far greater auditing systems with teeth, with penalties. I think that we should encourage governments to establish real penalties for companies that are discovered to have slavery in their supply chains. Because, without those guardrails, nothing changes, because this world is run on the profit motive. Money is king in the current world, and morals and empathy are a distant second and third. And so we have to hit people where it hurts, the people who profit from trafficked labor. And I have to say something that recently, when we went to speak to Coalition to Abolish Slavery Trafficking, which was one of our grantees from the fund as well, and what they did with our money was they hired an attorney. And one of their greatest ways that survivors come to them for help, they're a wraparound service provider in California, is for legal assistance. And then they are able to engage in their whole suite of services. And through this hired lawyer, they were able to take on, many over, 150 new clients in the year that he came on. And that good grows and grows, and their families thrive, and you have growing survivor leaders who come out of these situations who give back to the community. But he did say something to me which was deeply distressing, which was, in terms of his labor trafficking cases, the DA and the police were not interested in processing the labor trafficking cases. They were not interested in pursuing them. They were only interested in pursuing the sex trafficking cases. And one of the reasons he stated was that there was a reluctance to go after the job creators. And I think that, not holding big corporations accountable for their terrible practices of, using abused people to create their bottom line is not okay. And we need to raise more of a public outcry, for the forgotten victims of labor trafficking in many countries across the globe, not just this one. Obviously, sex trafficking victims, I think people can automatically relate to the tragedy of people being raped over and over again, especially minors. I mean, obviously, that's one of the most egregious things you can imagine yourself or for your children. But labor trafficking survivors are often given the short end of the stick. And I also believe in this country, it's because the preponderance of labor trafficking victims are almost all foreign born, whereas our sex trafficking victims, many of them are the domestic minor trafficking victims, are American citizens. And, when you have voiceless people who have no political clout in this country, as in many countries, the victims have no political clout. They may be paperless immigrants in Southeast Asia who are migrating. They may be indigenous populations who don't even speak the language. But when you have an underserved, marginalized community as your predominant demographic of a labor trafficked group or a sex trafficked group, those people are not a political priority for those in charge, because they do not help them get elected. They do not finance their campaigns, and they are mostly silent and buried underneath this wall of criminality that they are subjugated under. So I think that we really need to put more attention also on the pathways towards labor trafficking, all the recruitment, all of this the online scamming panel we just had was so eye-opening. Like, I didn't know half of what we were talking about. And it's such a rapidly growing industry using online technology and AI to exploit it and to create two classes of victims, both the, forced scammers the trafficked people who are in these scamming centers, and then their victims who they are bilking out of their money and their livelihoods. So I just think that we cannot be solely interested in and that's why we're here today, but we don't want to just focus on triage. We don't want to just focus on the after effects of what happens once we do identify victims, the few victims we do identify, and they exit or we help them exit. We have to bring survivor voices and survivor leaders to the forefront. They have the lived experience. They have the power of the authenticity of what the crime really means in human costs. But we really have to attack the crime before it happens so that we're just not always on a back foot, just catching up and letting the traffickers win this race. So anyway, I don't want to take up the whole time. I would like to see whether that video is available. Is it available?
It should work. Let me know if you get sound.
Are you going to press play?
Yeah, sorry, I don't know why. There we go.
There we go. So this video highlights this one center that we visited in Mexico City. And I do have to say that, our program that we funded there was a project to work with special needs and people on the spectrum and people with mental disabilities who were trafficking victims who were children. And some of them had been trafficked as babies. And they had not even gone through the normal stages of development, like crawling or fine motor skills or gross motor skills. And their biological age was not matched up with their mental age. And they have a trafficking survivor who runs this program, who has a very sophisticated program that brings those ages together so that those children can start to develop at an age appropriate level and interact with the world, with the benefit of all of this intervention. And we were kind of blown away by that because, first of all, the idea that you have all these people who already have been afflicted by some some conditions in their life and that these people have been victimized. But to see the joyful atmosphere that was created and to see the way that there was so much laughter and happiness and creativity in this center. And in learning more about this particular organization, they do a really holistic approach and they work in the community. They have drop-in centers for people who are in commercial sexual exploitation to drop in anytime to receive support. They work with educating men, as Abner will tell you about. They do so much, and that's the kind of holistic approach that we need to take. And they work with governments, they work with universities. So it's this partnership. I've seen this kind of partnership through another organization that I did a CNN documentary about called Every Day in Cambodia, the organization AIM, Agape International Missions in Cambodia, that created the most holistic response I've ever seen, where they started off rescuing kids and building safe houses. Then they started working with the parents who were trafficking their kids and giving them microloans or employing them and giving them, valuable day wages for their work so that the children didn't have to work for the parents. They built a school so the kids could go K through high school so that they could become the first educated members of their family so their family could have a future. They turned a thriving cesspool of pedophilic sex buying in Phnom Penh, Svai into a community that is starting to change the culture, where the community is starting to see it is not okay for people to sell their children. Whereas before it was endemic. Every kid, when they reached puberty, was sold for their virginity, like every single one, like 100%. They work with the government. They have a specialized police force that they pay extra to and train extra so that their raids do not end up empty-handed because the traffickers are tipped off by the police. They have successfully prosecuted traffickers and given victims justice. They work rescuing people in the brick kiln industry. They work on prevention throughout the community and empowering the community to build a future which respects the dignity of girls and builds and respects the migrant, respects the paperless Vietnamese immigrant, and builds up a sense of worth, which is at the cornerstone of any meaningful program against human trafficking. And they've helped thousands of people. And so we do have to attack this problem from all angles. Obviously, Ruchira is doing incredible work with Apnea in India. I have admired her for such a long time. And now she's written this popular novel about a young woman who is the source of her own exit, the source of her own salvation, which is different from the models of, the white savior story. This is a young girl who takes matters into her own hands, and she's a hero for the YA generation. But, just there's so much work out there to be done, but if we all engage in it, we can do it. I think supporting the fund is a great step if you don't know where to start. We're doing great work across the globe, and anyone can apply for our grants, and it's an easy application process. This is the last 2 days for our grant application session for Africa. We have a call for applications in Africa, specifically highlighting the work of youth-led organizations or survivor-led organizations, encouraging all to apply. But we have a special grant opening. We got a donation for that region. So anyway, I've taken up too much time. I just wanted to let you know that we have another event tonight. I have an event that I'm hosting at St. Patrick's Cathedral. Everyone is invited to attend. We have Louis C. DeBaca speaking, our former ambassador at large. We have 3 survivor leaders speaking. We will also be addressing the equality model. Abner will also be speaking, and it promises to be a really incredible night too. So that's 7 to 9 p.m. at St. Patrick's if anyone would like to attend. So thank you so much for allowing me to continue to serve. The one other thing that I wanted to mention was when we were in Mexico City, I saw one of the first survivors that I had ever met during my 2010 mission trip to Mexico. And her name is Carla Jacinto. And she had estimated she'd been raped over 40,000 times between the ages of 12 and 16 in her time in Tianancinco and as a sex trafficking victim. And she said the importance of survivor leaders is that when she was in exploitation, she did not see herself as a person. She did not see herself as a person who was due any sort of human rights. And when she saw ads for, if you're being exploited or something in a bathroom, she did not think it applied to her because she felt that she was not a human being and everything she did was controlled. She could not take a sip of water without her trafficker telling her, drink, don't chew like that, don't eat that, don't go to sleep now. Everything she did every second of her day was controlled. And so she had to learn that she had rights. But when she says if she saw someone like herself sharing these messages of hope and that there is a way out and that there is help available, if she saw someone with her lived experience, like Victoria, who's the head of our board of trustees, who spoke to the girls at the shelter in Puebla, I mean, their faces lit up. They were so joyful to see this powerful, eloquent, wonderful woman saying that there is a life ahead of them that will be of their own choosing, and they can be their own heroes of their own stories. And so she said it would have been the difference between her being able to leave her situation so much earlier if she had seen the face of an organization expressing that hopeful handout, being a survivor leader. So I just wanted to emphasize that. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mir, for your heartfelt and urgent message and a call to action. You have also brought up the real solution to not reducing but eradicating demand for sex trafficking, which is the equality model. And with that, I would like to now transition into the heart of today's conversation, our panel discussion on eradicating demand. Our panel includes global experts and survivor leaders who are actively changing the narrative and the systems that allow trafficking to exist. Let me briefly introduce our panelists. Taina Bianami, Executive Director of Coalition Against Trafficking in Women. Blessing Ocadian, survivor leader, founder of Weavers of Hope, member of the European Network of Migrant Women, and board member of Women's Platform for Action International. Jerome Milam, survivor leader, president of Trafficking in America Task Force. Sylvia Meyer, academic director, clinical professor at NYU Center for Global Affairs, and Abner Velez Ortiz, director of Prevention with Men program at El Pozo de Vida. So I'd like to start with Taina. From your global advocacy perspective, why is demand still tolerated or overlooked? CATW advocates for the adoption of the equality model globally. Can you explain why this model is the best legislative model to eradicate demand? Taina, over to you.
Thank you. Greetings to all. Thank you, Tatiana, and thanks to Ruchira and APNIA for organizing this important event on World Day Against Trafficking. And thanks also to UNODC, UN Women, and UNODC Global Ambassador Mira Sorvino, who's done so much. I've known you for 20 years, Mira, and what you've done to bring light to this global human rights scourge is just amazing. And a special note and thank you to Delphine, whose last day at UNODC New York is today. And we wanted to thank you for just your outstanding work that you've done on this issue and for your friendship. We're going to miss you very much. Since my fellow panelists have already talked about the uphill battle on targeting demand, as a women's rights organization, and to reiterate what Yelise presented, it gives us resolve and hope to examine the arc of violence and discrimination against women and girls across the millennia and study what strategies and tactics have been used to make our governments take the protection of women's rights seriously. What laws must be in place, both national and at the international level, what harmful cultural practices must be addressed, what economic situations must change, putting at the forefront, as was said many times before, the lived experiences of victims and survivors. So when one examines how to address the demand that fosters sex trafficking, and to your question, Tatiana, why is demand so tolerated and overlooked? We have to approach it the same way we address other forms of violence and discrimination against women and girls. We must constantly ask ourselves and challenge our governments as to why is there still so much sociocultural and political acceptance of male violence against women. And as was mentioned, the vast majority of detected human trafficking victims are women and girls, with an overwhelming percentage of that number being trafficked for purposes of prostitution. And on the other end, globally, 99% of sex buyers are men. So automatically a gender inequality issue and a dilemma the dilemma that we try to crack is, why is that type of violence dismissed just because men purchase the right to exercise it? So our collective approach in addressing the demand for the purchase of sexual acts or the demand for prostitution must be along the same lines of the approaches we have historically used to combat domestic violence, sexual harassment, each of which was deemed for thousands and thousands of years as part of home life, married life, or workplace life. And I would add that because the purchase of sexual acts is a harmful cultural practice, it's stitched in our culture, in our communities, in the Hollywood system, in academia. We're training generation after generation to believe that prostitution is empowering and a job like any other. It's also steeped in our social media environment, that we can also take tools from the fight against other harmful cultural practices like female genital mutilation. For example, always returning to the same question as to why women and girls are deemed so unworthy as human beings that atrocities can be perpetrated against them, not only with impunity, but also under a cultural narrative that gaslights us into believing that it's their fault or their choice, never looking at the harm done by the sex buyers or the system of prostitution itself. So in the 1970s, these were the questions that the Swedish women's movement was successful in getting their government to understand and address. So these efforts weren't unique to the Swedish women's government, but they certainly were singularly successful in persuading policymakers and their country that the system of prostitution was one that was predicated on power, control, abuse of vulnerability, the subordination of women, and that the impact on women, medical, psychological, socioeconomic, et cetera, was devastating and lifelong. It took Sweden 20 years of persuasion, and in 1999, Sweden became the first country to codify prostitution as male violence against women, and also as a vector of sex trafficking and organized crime. So in a nutshell, the law, the equality model, decriminalizes prostituted individuals. It offers them services and holds accountable purchases of sexual acts. Equally important is the cultural impacts that the law has had on the Swedish population. Namely, while a vast majority prior to the law believed, the majority of Swedish people believed that it was perfectly acceptable to purchase another human being for sexual acts. Today, the vast majority believe the opposite, that not only is it unacceptable to purchase prostitution, but that it's also a barrier to equality for women. So that is the trajectory we want to see, a devastating, harmful cultural practice being recognized as a human rights violation. So Sweden was alone for 10 years promoting this law. Governments would make fun of them, actually. And then 10 years later, Iceland and Norway followed suit, thus the shift of the name from the Swedish model to the Nordic model. And today, Northern Ireland, Canada, France, the Republic of Ireland, Israel, and the US state of Maine have enacted this legal framework, which has many names now, including the abolitionist model, the survivor model, and of course, the equality model. And a number of jurisdictions around the world have equality model bills on the books, including New York, but we know the battle is very, very tough. So to conclude, like our premise is, and again, as Gilles listed, that international legal instruments, including CEDAW and the Palermo Protocol and other UN instruments like the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls 2024 report on prostitution and violence and prostitution as violence. It's a remarkable report. Everybody should read it. It clearly mandates and calls on member states to adopt this model as a key tool to prevent sex trafficking and promote equality for women and girls. But whether the cultural, state, corporate, and philanthropic systems of our countries have the political will to do so is the question that calls us every single day. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Taina, for bringing into context why equality model is important, the history behind it, and the fact that that is the key in ending sex trafficking and violence against women and girls. With that, I would like to transition to Blessing and ask her, what does demand look like in the context of your own lived experience? Blessing?
Okay. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the organizer of this event and the speakers that have spoken so far. And we have actually, I personally benefited from a lot of what the speakers have spoken so far, and also as a survivor leader and working also with survivors and victims in the field of trafficking is something great that I've actually learned also today from the previous speakers. Today, I am not just only going to speak as a survivor leader, but as a witness to a system built on violence, control, and erasure. Because human trafficking, I personally, as I have witnessed, is a destruction of person's freedom, dignity, identity. And this destruction is often driven by the mind of sex buyers. From my own personal experience, I can tell you that human trafficking is a system where traffickers and pimps strips victims of their names, stories, origin, and even age, and are therefore given false identity in response to the demand of sex buyers. This is not accidental. It is a deliberate, calculated tactics of dehumanization designed to erase who the victim is and replace her with a product that can be sold and bought. Her rich self, personality, as the daughter of somebody, as a sister, as a human being, became hidden or destroyed in her place. A teen is created by traffickers and sex buyers. All these are to meet the demand. This demand for sex is what drives recruitment, movement, control of women and girls in trafficking networks. In Italy and elsewhere, many victims are trafficked to isolated roads, bush paths, apartments, and brothels and online that are places chosen by the traffickers. But the traffickers know exactly where buyers go looking for these victims because it is the product that the traffickers put on sale. The women do not have any choice as regards, and yet they are blamed, judged, stigmatized, and criminalized, while the sex buyers who abuse them remain invisible. The mind is the engine of this system of exploitation and violence. Without sex buyers, there would be no reason to recruit, deceive, move, and control women and girls in the first place. What looked like a choice to some is in fact a survival strategy under extreme conditions, often under threat, death, or violence. The daily sexual acts inflicted on victims are not transactions. They are violations, repeated over and over until many break down physically, emotionally, and spiritually, and could directly lead to their death, which never make headlines and are rarely included in femicide statistics. Their deaths are ignored like their lives were. This is not a market. It is a system of commodity, violence built on racism and sexism, patriarchy. And we must stand to fight against this valuation, against this humiliation, against this erasure. Thank you.
Thank you for such a powerful message, Blessing, that really brings into perspective that we are talking about here human dignity. We are not talking about objects. We are talking about those that are actually creating the demand for the destruction of women, girls, boys, and men all across the world just for their own pleasure. With that, I would like to actually invite Jerome Elam and ask you the following. What is often missed when we talk about male victims of trafficking and demand?
Thank you, Tatiana. I want to thank Apne, UNDC, and everyone that sponsored this talk today. Especially a shout out to Mira Servino for elevating and amplifying the voices of victims and survivors. I also want to say on this World Day Against Trafficking that I am here today not only as a survivor, but a living testament. There's a hope and a light inside all of us no one can extinguish. And I want to let every victim and survivor watching here today know you're not alone and that you matter and your story matters always. When we talk about demand for male victims of human trafficking, it's a crime that's hiding in plain sight. It's something that has just only increased exponentially over the past 10 years. We have 5 studies now that show that male victims of sex trafficking comprise around 35% of victims. Now, why is this not apparent? It's because as males, we are not able to speak out about being vulnerable, about being abused. So we remain hidden in plain sight. Also, demand is being driven on the dark web, on the internet, where anonymity allows these predators to actually go and buy and sell human beings every second that we're talking right now. So demand for males is something that I am very adamant about addressing. And one of the key ways that we do that also is by legislation. We have to make sure that the legislation and the laws are in place that help prosecute individuals, but also help identify male victims that are being trafficked. Most male victims of human trafficking are arrested for petty theft or other crimes and not for human trafficking. And most oftentimes, when we see someone who's being labor trafficked, they can also be sex trafficked at the same time. So we have to begin to dig deeper and look into what crimes are actually occurring at this moment. Now, demand for male victims of trafficking is truly relevant at this point in time. As Tatiana and I know, when we did a rapid assessment tour of Slovakia, looking at those leaving Ukraine due to the conflict, there were thousands of young boys being made vulnerable, leaving as they left their fathers behind to fight in the conflict. Now, we encountered many young boys along our journey who had no parents whatsoever. So that vulnerability existed for them to be exploited. And we know that when Ukraine was recently invaded, that the internet search and demand for victims of human trafficking in Ukraine also skyrocketed. So there's vulnerability that's being generated around the world by conflict, by natural disasters, and by anything that comes along that disrupts that family system. As a victim who was trafficked by their own family, I understand the trauma that comes along with that and the vulnerabilities. And again, we have to begin to recognize, especially within males, what makes them particularly vulnerable to being trafficked and being exploited. And if we don't work together and acknowledge that this is not a gender problem, it is a human problem. And so we have to work together, both as men and women, to go after these depraved individuals to make sure that we close the loopholes that allow them to exploit people and to elevate the voices of survivor leaders and make sure they are key players in creating legislation and policy to help combat human trafficking.
Thank you so much, Jerome, for highlighting all that the fact that it's not just women and girls who are trafficked for sexual exploitation, it is also boys and men, whilst the very vast majority of sex buyers are men, and that needs to be highlighted as well. With that, I would like to move on to Sylvia Meyer. And I would like to ask you the following question. How can academic research support or challenge policies on demand?
Thank you so much, Tatiana. And also for me, a very warm good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's a great honor to be on this panel with you and to participate in this really, really important conversation. And I want to give a special thank you and shout out to my wonderful friend and colleague of many years here at NYU, Ruchira Gupta, for her incredible work as the leader of Apne Up and her incredible efforts to eradicate the scourge of human and sex trafficking around the world. I'm an academic. I have been in academia for my entire professional life. I also consider myself an advocate and an activist for women's rights around the world. And I really would like to make the case for academia as a very powerful ally in the struggle against the scourge of human trafficking. And there are a couple of ways in which academia, and I'm looking in particular the students and the colleagues that I have here at NYU, a few of them are on this call, my student Sophia and McCall and my colleague Barbara Borst, who have worked very, very actively in the space of women's rights and human trafficking and the rights of refugees and displaced, especially women and girls. So we can help as allies with expert NGOs and governments in really three ways. The first is teaching, the second is research, and the third is through building experiential, if you will, and I will explain in a second, partnerships. Clearly teaching, we all know that one of the principal objectives or goals, duties, obligations of institutions of higher learning, of higher education, is kind of educating the next generation of policymakers, of leaders. I'm the academic director of a graduate program, the MS in Global Affairs, here at the School of Professional Studies at NYU, and our objective is to educate young people to take up leadership roles in international organizations, in global nonprofits, in advocacy groups around the world, and many other positions, but this is the field that I'm particularly working in. And I think and I also oversee our gender studies concentration. One of the things that we can really do in academia is to educate young people who in many cases really don't know what human and sex trafficking is about. That the depth of the challenges, the profound suffering of women and girls, as well as of young boys, as Jerome just explained. They really have to understand what is happening. They really have to understand the long-lasting consequences. They have to understand that it's not, quote unquote, just about purchasing sex, but it's about the systematic, as it has been said earlier, the systematic degradation, exploitation, and the destruction of the lives of young people. And of course, we can do that in our courses, and we can educate young people about this, but we have to dig much deeper, and we try to do that. We have to really systematically challenge the myths about what it means to be a man. We have to really systematically challenge the understandings, the false assumptions about what it means to be a girl and a woman. I will say a little bit about this later. And I was doing a little bit of preparation for this panel in that I was trying to find out how many programs are there in the English-speaking world or at English-speaking universities in the northern part of the Americas as well as in Europe. And there are only a handful of programs, academic programs, that focus that focus on human trafficking. There are a handful of certificate programs, there are a handful of minors and concentrations. And I think we really need to increase that number because we need to provide young people with the opportunity, and us as advocates and you as activists with an opportunity or with a space to really show the complexity of the problem, that human trafficking also involves labor trafficking, it involves criminal justice, it involves public health issues, it involves migration questions, it involves questions of the supply chain. My colleague York Rhodes here at NYU, who also works at Microsoft, he may be on the call today. I know he's at another professional meeting, has been very, very active, and Ruchira knows him as well, in moving the needle of awareness regarding the supply chain and labor rights and labor trafficking, especially in South Asia. So we really need to kind of raise awareness about the complexity of the problem, the drivers, as well as of the complexity of the solutions, which brings me to my second point, and that is research. Again, I was trying to find out kind of how many papers are written every year, academic papers in English language publications, and there are about 120 every year. That's a lot. But we also have to, of course, be aware that not everybody reads academic papers. So I think another way in which academia can move the needle and can partner with organizations such as UPNE Up is to become a knowledge hub for the both production as well as the dissemination of material, of reports, of short pieces such as op-ed pieces, for instance, written by faculty or students that really, really highlight the complexity of the problems, and not just highlighting the problems, but also disseminate and serve as a platform for the dissemination of best practices and solutions. Research, so teaching, research, and then partnerships. Partnerships, I think, are a very, very effective way in which academic programs or individual faculty members and students can support the struggle against human and sex trafficking. And one example is a partnership that Ruchira and I had last year. In the fall, Ruchira and I co-facilitated what is called a consulting practicum, in which 6 of our graduate students worked with Ruchira and UPNE Up on 3 white papers to be used for advocacy or for further information on money laundering and human trafficking, on AI and human trafficking, and best practices in the private sector, especially in the hospitality and tourism industry, as well as in transportation. So our students, over the course of a semester plus 1 or 2 extra months, were really working to dig up information, with interviews, primary and secondary research in these spaces, which we then provided to UPNE Up. So especially in times of where funding is very, very tight for NGOs, for nonprofit organizations, please tap into the resources, at universities, such as NYU or other universities that have human trafficking or gender studies programs, excuse me, to see to what extent we can provide or can help provide and unearth data. And we all talked about this, Yelis, you talked about it, Delphine, Ruchira, as well as Mira, data for data-informed policy recommendations, especially in our fields, and we all know this, it's crucially important, for doubters, for people, who don't take us as seriously. That can be governments, that can be political leaders, that can be the private sector, to provide hard and fast data of what is actually happening on the ground. And universities, programs, individuals can really be a very strong resource, a very powerful and passionate resource. So to conclude, universities, people within universities can be very strong allies. You would be surprised how many students are really, really passionate about the subject. They just don't know, how to go about getting involved beyond internships or study abroads or GFIs. But please reach out if our program can, support you in any way. And let's fight this together, and we will win this battle. I have no doubt whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sylvia, and thank you for highlighting the important role that academic research institutions can truly play in bringing up real facts versus specific policies that are driven by something else beyond facts, for example. With that, I would like to hand over to Abner Velez Ortiz and ask you the following. What narratives around masculinity must be challenged to end demand?
Thank you so much. Hey, everyone. First for all, on behalf of El Pozo de Vida, I want to say that we are very excited and thankful for the invitation to be part of this panel. It's a honor to stand next to giants, people who, like us, are fighting against human trafficking. And in our organization, we have a motto that we truly love and believe in: freedom for all. And maybe you are wondering, why are you talking about freedom for all in a panel about demand? So, well, here's the thing. The sex industry makes billions of dollars every day, every year, and most of the money comes from men. Men who, because of a culture that normalizes violence against women, might develop addiction that leads them to consume. More than ever in the fight against sexual exploitation, women need to pause, be quiet, reflect, and take responsibility. Dr. Angel Christian Luna speaks about in his research, and I fully agree for that. So, to be honest, I think there is many ideas about masculinity and demand that we need to talk about. Well, I want to focus on just two. First, the myth about male sexuality, like this belief that sex is a biological need, even though science has shown that this is not true. Many men still believe that if they don't have sex, something bad will happen to them. So to satisfy that strong desire, and if they don't have sex at home, they go to prostitution, and they believe the woman there love sex or are addicted to a man, which in other myth, we know these women are being hurt in many ways. Second, I believe we as a man need to take a responsibility. This is not just about paying for sex. We also need to talk about pornography and live shows like striptease, table dance, whatever. These are also forms of sexual exploitation, and we need to talk about that. It's important to talk about that, and a part of the human trafficking also. Taking responsibility means we must stop and reflect on what kind of masculinity we have. We need to understand that women are not objects. I need to repeat again. We need to understand that women are not objects. No person should ever be treated like something that can be bought or sold. I believe I really want to say this. I believe the time to hack the system or traditional masculinity is now. And that can be a good starting point to end to the map. Thank you, Tatiana.
Thank you so much for highlighting the role of pornography as the demand driver, which tells men that women want to do this and enjoy this. In over 20 years of work all across the world and working with victims and survivors, both of prostitution and sex trafficking, I've never met anyone who said that they want to grow up and be in prostitution. Not one. With that, Taina, I would like to turn back to you and ask you, what role should governments play in penalizing buyers?
Thank you. So briefly, I think that that question has been answered by our esteemed colleagues from UN Women and UNODC. the international law is close to sterling on the issue. You've got Article 9.5 of the Palermo Protocol that mandates governments to address all forms of prevention from an educational, cultural, legislative, educational perspective. There's Article 6 of CEDAW, the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, that also makes it clear that sex trafficking, the trafficking in women and girls are linked to the system of prostitution. And then you just have the basic documents from the non-binding Universal Declaration of Human Rights that really talks about the inalienability of human rights and the dignity of human beings. And then all that the UNH has launched, such as all the international covenants on economic, social, political, and educational rights, and the list goes on. So we do have the tools. That we are not, I think, just to go back to Abner's brilliant presentation, this isn't a legal issue. This is a cultural issue that we are fighting. And we know that governments are made of individuals who grew up in a specific culture. So the task before us is to constantly persuade our governments through advocacy campaigns, through survivor leadership, who always need to be at the decision-making tables, to really persuade them to abide by law, but also to change their cultural framework into believing that women or human beings who are extremely marginalized, who are overwhelmingly women and girls, and particularly of color, are products to be bought and sold for the profit of the few, and that is something that is inevitable. So yes, I think we're all in this together to make sure that that systems are in place to persuade our governments to pass the equality model at the national level, for starters.
Thank you so much, Taina. And this is actually also important. I see Mira would like to add something.
Yes. How, I have two questions. How, Taina, do we support the passage of this model in New York? And good luck at the national level right now. I don't think that that's realistic in this administration, but I do think that, in the future, perhaps, I think it would be fantastic, but I don't know that, look, maybe I'm being naive. Maybe it's possible, but how do we support your work in this state and other states? Like how do viewers today get involved to help get the equality model passed or introduced on their state legislative agenda? And then for Abner, I wanted to ask about what is your model working with men that you have devised that you do at universities? How do you put it into practice?
Thank you, Mira. That will be a follow-up question already pre-prepared for Abner, but Taina, over to you.
So for the last 6 years, we have been educating and conducting outreach with our New York State legislators to pass the Sex Trade Survivors Justice and Equality Act, which is the title of our equality model bill. It is unbelievably difficult to persuade our legislators as to this bill being a key tool to prevent sex trafficking and also to end the arrests and incarceration of people in prostitution and offer them services. And hold buyers accountable. The way I think that is most helpful to us is really using the social media tools. Again, it's a cultural battle, and I think we have amazing survivors who are leading the way. We just need to expand beyond New York City and go across state. So if anybody on this call is linked to any anti-trafficking groups or groups that work to end violence against women and girls in the state of New York, please join the New Yorkers for the Equality Model. We have a website, which I don't see a chat but we can put it in the Q&A, I guess. And there are a number of other states across the U.S. that, because prostitution is governed at a state level, Spain is thinking about also enacting an equality model bill. There are a number of countries in Europe. The resistance is obviously very fierce. Otherwise it would have passed already. But again, it took 20 years for Sweden to pass it. And so although we would like it to pass next year, we still have a little leeway compared to the Swedes. But yeah, I would say go on our website, New Yorkers for the Equality Model, and spread the word as to the notion that prostitution is not work. It is not inevitable. It was invented and created for the subordination of women on the marketplace.
Thank you so much, Taina. And there are indeed incredible initiatives happening in New York State, but also globally that we need to get behind and support and work in tandem together. There are also co-sponsoring organizations of this event that are working on this globally, like CAP International, and the European Network of Migrant Women. And with that, I would like to turn to Blessing and ask you, how can we center survivor leaders' voices in shaping laws that target sex buyers and effectively prevent human trafficking? Blessing?
No, I can't activate myself. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you so much. And, one thing that is very, very important about survivors leader is for us to understand that involving their voice and centering their voices is a matter of impact, because survivors of human trafficking carry with them not just personal pain, but lived expertise that offers unique insights into how trafficking truly operates, because they have experienced it in firsthand. They know what it means to be stripped of a name, assigned a first age, and sold in places they did not choose, on dark streets and webs, in apartments and brothels or isolated bush paths. These details are not just theoretical. They are lived reality. They are their own personal experience. Survivors understand that demand is what fuels trafficking and contributes to a violent system that exploits vulnerability, poverty, and inequality. Laws that only punish traffickers without addressing sex buyers ignores the root of the problem. That is why survivor leaders must not be consulted only after laws are written. They must be present from the beginning to co-design, writing definition, and shaping penalties, and ensuring that protection and exit services are part of every legal framework. Survivors also know how system can fail, because in my own experience, and also working with other survivors and victims, I understand how a system can fail. Because we have seen how police often arrest victims instead of the buyer. We have experienced how trauma is misunderstood in the courtrooms. That is why our voices are crucial in training law enforcement, guiding justice reforms, and ensuring that anti-trafficking efforts do not harm the very people they are meant to protect. When we build policies with survivors, not seeing it as just for them, then we create laws that are more just, more effective, and grounded in real life truths. Survivors' leaders are not symbolic voices. They are experts, just like every other experts. They are agents of change, capable of reshaping institutions and dismantling the system that once silenced them. To end trafficking, we must listen, include, and follow the leadership of those who have survived it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Blessing, for such a powerful message that clearly states why survivor leaders need to be at the center of change when it comes to laws, culture, and understanding of this phenomenon. With that, I would like to go to Jerome Elam and ask you the following. What change would you like to see in how male exploitation is addressed? And how can men become part of the solution rather than the silence?
Thank you, Tatiana. Well, one of the base tenets that we have to look at when we talk about victims of human trafficking, especially men, is what we call adverse childhood experiences. This is a yardstick we can look at when we're measuring someone's vulnerability being trafficked. We have to begin to recognize in children when these vulnerabilities are happening and give them the support they need to overcome these difficulties and not be vulnerable to being trafficked. The other thing that we need to do is we need to use trauma-informed methods when we're dealing with victims survivors so we don't re-traumatize them. I know of a case where a survivor was engaged by an organization and she was not ready to be put in a public spotlight, ended up being re-trafficked all over again. So we've got to be sensitive in how we engage survivors. Now, in specifics, we talk about men. One of the things that dooms us to a prison of silence when we're being victimized or trafficked is our egos. We've got to begin to redefine the male ego and how it's perceived by society. Now, I want to say that, I would not be here today if it wasn't for someone like Blessing, a female survivor, who took me aside and taught me that I could be a male, I could be vulnerable, and I could be powerless and still be a man. Because as men, as victims of abuse and trafficking, we have 14 times the suicide rate and 38 times the rate of drug overdose of the norm. So men become trapped by this prison of silence. The fear and shame is too much to overcome. So we turn to drugs or alcohol or other destructive things. Men who are victims of trafficking abuse are 35% likely to be incarcerated as juveniles and 55% more likely to be incarcerated as adults. So as men, we internalize what's happening to us, and we try to explain it away. We don't confront it as we should. So we need to begin to acknowledge that men can be victims and elevate the voices of male survivors and let them help other men understand they can talk about this. I have been contacted by hundreds of men over my 20-year career as a survivor leader. And, probably 98% of them don't want to talk to anybody else because they're so scared of how they're perceived. If they divulge that they were actually victimized and trafficked, as a boy, even as a man, that they just won't talk about it. So we've got to begin to recreate that narrative. We got to begin to make sure that men are included in the conversation and actually make sure that men's voices are inclusive and matter. And I just want to say that I'm so incredibly proud to have worked with Tatiana and other survivor leaders on the updated national referral mechanisms for the OSC ODIHR that is probably the most in-depth and comprehensive guide to male victims of human trafficking that's ever been published. Actually, people I talk to in the global community call it the Bible of human trafficking. So we've got to begin to incorporate male survivors and victims in and use that knowledge to help prevent the next one from being victimized. And again, if you want to bring men into this conversation, one of the things that we do, and again, we've talked about pornography here today, and that is a major driver. We go into public schools and we do something what's called healthy relationships. We go in and educate young men and young women about what a healthy relationship looks like. And again, this is a great tool also because we get so many disclosures from young men and young women who don't understand that what's happening to them at home is not appropriate. If they're being abused, if they're being, subject to any kind of abuse, they will begin to talk about this. And I've had this happen even when I've spoken abroad in Switzerland. I've had people just come forward and talk about what's going on with them. And we also have to include men, especially fathers, in a discussion about protecting their own children. And I think that we need to make clear the vulnerability that exists, especially when it comes to the internet, where people can be lured in so quickly. And we know that the majority of victims who are taken from the internet are found in chat rooms where they feel a disconnect with their peers or their parents, and they feel like they have no one to turn to. So we've got to begin, as I see, to encourage parents to have a conversation with their kids, smartphone down, please, and talk to your kids every day about what's going on in their lives and make sure they understand that they're important in your life, but also encourage teachers and give them the knowledge and the training to be able to recognize when a victim, especially a young man, is being trafficked. I mean, I, was trafficked for 7 years, picked up by different people in different cars every day, but no one recognized what was happening to me until I ended up in the emergency room. So let's use knowledge, which is our greatest weapon against human trafficking, and make sure that men and boys know they can talk about this, but also give law enforcement, healthcare professionals, mental health professionals the tools they need to begin to recognize and help young males begin to recover what's happened to them. I spent 12 years in the Marine Corps and still did not have the tools I needed. So I spent 25 years with a trauma therapist digging into what happened to me as a child, only to begin then to find out, who I truly was, and that I was truly deserving of love and the peace of happiness that I have today.
Thank you so much, Jerome, for sharing your journey and the importance of really understanding victimhood from the male perspective. Now I would like to move back to Sylvia and Abner, and because we are running late, I would ask you to keep your remarks short so that we could get to the other parts of the program. So Sylvia, are there examples of countries or models where strategies targeted at demand have shown measurable success?
Thank you, Tatiana. I think this is a question to which Jerome and Abner can speak very much in detail as well. This is just to say it is a very tricky question that you're asking, because what we're talking about is moving the needle in a space where we need to invoke both punishment as well as incentives to move behaviors and to move attitudes in a culturally effective manner. So it needs to be a holistic approach. In the most general sense, programs and projects and initiatives that are led by men, that are anchored in another issue, if you will, such as parenthood, changing understandings of masculinity, of fatherhood, domestic violence, and public health, such as, for instance, HIV protection or prevention, are very, very effective. There are some very concrete initiatives and projects, such as, for instance, and I'm just looking at my notes here, the Don't Buy It project. That's part of the project of Men as Peacemakers that has been somewhat successful. There is the Disrupt Demand initiative that has been run, that was run for 2 years by the Immigrant Gap Council of Ireland. It is an EU approach, or an EU-funded initiative, I should say, that is focused on research and sharing best practices, and that fell under the precursor to what is now 21-25, the EU strategy on combating trafficking in human beings. That now has a very concrete clause that includes measures to discourage demand. So we have to come at it really from all sides, as I said earlier. And in terms of finding and identifying best practices and collecting data, again, this is a role that universities and students and faculty can play to support work such as Ruchira's and Abner's and Jerome's, with passion and at a very low cost, or at zero cost, so to speak, and support you in your work. So thank you, Tatiana.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. And for our final question for this discussion, Abner, can you share a story where prevention with men worked? What practical tools can others adopt from your prevention approach?
Thank you, Tatiana. But first, I need to say what a strong voice from Blessing are sharing with us in this day. I'm taking this word and these old elements to do my work more better, to change the life for everyone. I need to say, is it true? The voices to survivor people are so important to come to the table and have this kind of conversation, sometimes an uncomfortable conversation. Thank you, Blessings, so much for your words today. So for answer, in one of our workshop about positive masculinity, a teacher shared with me that he used to pay for sex. And until that moment, he didn't think he was doing anything wrong. He didn't think he was, sorry, part of the problem. But through honest conversation and reflection, he starts to see his role in this big issue, an issue that was costing him more than just money. As far as we know, he decided to stop and start therapy. Let me share a tool from our work at Pozo de Vida. We run a program called Prevention with Men. With Men, I'm a director in this program. So we create an holistic model that includes prevention, intervention, and restoration. For answer the Mira question, in prevention, we do courses, workshops, talks, and conference with men. Actually, I have three intimate circles from men. This workshop only for men, and I have students from the National University and also teacher in the National University. It's a little strong to have this, to build this kind of connection with the men, because our culture are so hard, so strong, and toxic masculinity is a constant in our culture. But we are trying to do, we are having this kind of conversation about masculinity, healthy masculinity, prostitution, gender violence, and how to be agents from the change, to trying to rebuild this kind of social structure more healthy and walking shoulder to shoulder, in intervention, we go into our red light districts in Mexico City and speak directly to the men who buy sex and even those who exploit others. It's so happy, and it's like a joke, but I'm giving free coffee for those men in the red light districts and start to conversation. What are you doing here? What do you think? What do you think about sexual exploitation? What do you think about these girls? They love to work, be here. It's no work. This kind of comfortable conversation. And recently, we launched our restoration program, a coaching model for men who know they have a problem with pornography and prostitution and want to change. So if you ask me about the secret to our work, it's a little hard to me to say that, but we need empathy, healthy vulnerability, and tenderness. These three kind of stuff is so important to work with men, because our culture miss the importance of empathy, vulnerability, and tenderness. And we need to start to have this conversation and many time to talk with other men. These three things have helped us to get close to men and help them rewrite their stories. I truly believe in revolution, to kind that means when a man says, I want something different. And I think this change starts when he questions himself and questions the system. It's time for this kind of revolution. So long life revolution.
Thank you so
Tatiana.
much for your call. for revolution against toxic masculinity. And with that, I'd like to thank our panelists for your insights, courage, and conviction. I know we are running a little bit late, but we have an important reading and closing remarks from Vital Voices, so I hope you can stick around for a few more minutes. With that, I would like to now shift to a powerful moment of reflection through storytelling. I'm honored to welcome two young people who are going to do a reading for us from the upcoming book. You're getting a preview by Ruchira Gupta called The Freedom Seeker. And I would like to welcome Ilian Baijal and Hudson Hort to do a short reading for us. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. Hi, my name is Eliane Bajel, and I will be speaking as Simi, a 12-year-old who has crossed the Sonoran Desert from Mexico into the United States with her mother, and she's risking everything to reunite with her father, who is a taxi driver, waiting for both of them in Queens, New York. But somewhere in the vast, blistering expanse, the smugglers, who are known as the Coyotes, tore mother and daughter apart. Now Simi is alone with 3 other children. We have Jose, a boy from Honduras, who is escaping the grip of gang warfare. And we also have another speaker who will be with us playing Jose. She is Rajuta Calantre. We also have Sophia and Carlo, who are quiet siblings caught in the tides of forced migration. Sophia will be played by Serena Shaw, and Carlo will be played by McCall Moran. And we also have a man who calls himself El Lobo. This character will be played by Shijuti Day. El Lobo says he's here to help, but the children are dehydrated, they're afraid, and surrounded by nothing but desert. And so the scene we're going to be reading begins with silence, with a tear, and with the question, when you are far from everyone you love, how do you know who to trust? So let your ears be your eyes and let the desert speak.
Simi, we must get away from these men. They're collecting kids.
Jose, what do you mean?
I heard those 2 men talking. They said the boys would be good for the egg farm. They need the boys to feed the chickens, remove the eggs, clean the coops, all the time.
And me, the girls?
I don't know, but I don't like what they said. I heard them laugh. One of them said the girls might fetch more at massage parlors.
We heard it too. They want to make more money.
The wind whistled across the sand. The children reached for one another's hands, holding tight. A tear slipped down Simi's cheek. They can't. My Ami and Abu will find me.
How? They don't even know where you are.
Hush, someone's coming.
A tall man approached, holding a can of soda. A red bandana hung around his neck, faded from sun and sweat. His eyes were hidden behind dark sunglasses, but his voice held the slippery confidence of someone who liked control. A jagged scar ran from the corner of his lip down his chin, twisting with every word. A snake tattoo curled up one side of his neck, half hidden by the collar of his shirt. One side of his belt drooped with the weight of a holstered gun. He leaned against a bare tree stub, gazing down at the children.
You can call me a Lobo. I'm your coyote. I'll take you across the desert. Don't worry, I've helped more than 50,000 kids get into the US.
I will not give in. I am the captain of my hockey team. Grandfather said the way to win is to fight without fighting. I will make a plan. El Lobo, can you tell us where our mothers are?
With ICE.
Ice in the desert?
Not ICE, ICE. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Those helicopters, they're Border Patrol. You're already in the US.
If we're in the US, why are we still in the desert? Where are the roads, cars, houses, shops?
Just follow me. I'll show you. Hurry up. You don't want to die out here.
Don't trust him. He's hiding something. Let's keep sitting. Pretend we can't walk anymore.
Abu told me to be brave, that even when the path vanishes, we must keep walking. Jose, let's not show El Lobo we know. Let's get out of the desert first. Follow him. He's the only one with water, the only one who knows the way to the road. Simi stood up. She picked up a broken branch from the tree El Lobo was leaning on. Jose stood up, dusting off her clothes. Carlo and Sophia got up too. El Lobo, sir, we will follow you, but we need water to walk. Can you give us something? Anything. May I use this branch as a walking stick? El Lobo smirked and nodded. Each child was handed a soda. They drank deeply. Then, one by one, they picked up their backpacks and looked at El Lobo. El Lobo put his music pods into his ears, gestured to the kids to follow, and began walking. They followed single file. First Simi, then Jose, Sophia, and Carlo followed. The sun blazed above them. The desert stretched on, endless. I wish I had my hockey stick now, just to remember who I was. A captain, someone who led. Can I still be that girl in the middle of all this sand?
Simi, do you hear that?
Jose, he'll kill us.
It's a car engine. The engine noise grew louder. El Lobo's pods were stuck in his ears. Simi looked at the other children, pressed a finger to her lips, and quietly pulled out her scarf. She tied it to her walking stick and raised it high into the air. 1, 2, 3. Help!
Help, help.
Help!
Who's there? Stay where you are.
El
El
Lobo
Lobo
stopped
and
and
turned.
he
He
reached for his gun.
Border Patrol.
The car came into view. El Lobo took one look and ran away from the children into the dew.
Who's there? Stay where you are.
Please.
Help!
Over here.
We're here.
I can't walk anymore. I chose to be sea. Simi sinks to the desert floor. Narrator. The children looked at each other, wide-eyed. Terrified, Jose drew question marks in the sand and quickly erased them as footsteps approached. None of them answered. The desert stretched wide in all directions. El Lobo had the only water. His lie seeped into Simi's foggy brain. She sat up and trying to find even a scrap of the truth in his eyes. They had no choice. He walked ahead. The others disappeared, maybe to find more children. El Lobo kept stepping away for phone calls.
Jose stayed silent. Carla and Sophia kept looking back at Simi and Jose. They trusted them to decide. She sipped some water. It burned her cracked lips. For a moment, she wished she brought her hockey stick just to remind herself she was still a captain. She could still lead. But how do you lead in a place with no path? Then, a sound. At first, she thought it was in her head, but no. An engine, a white pickup truck, a green stripe, the US flag. She remembered her Abu, how he crossed by surrendering. She reached for her scarf. El Lobo dropped his phone.
Stop. That's Border Patrol.
Who's there? Stay where you are.
They screamed louder. El Lobo ran into the bushes. Dust rose as the car approached. Simi's legs gave out. She fell to her knees, but she was not afraid, not anymore. She made her choice.
I just want to say thank you so much to our intern team for performing that. I think they did a great job, and I'm really happy to have been able to do it with them, even in such a small part. Up on the screen now is a QR code that will bring you to the Amazon page for the Freedom Seeker. We would really love it if you could spread the word about the book or purchase copies for yourself. We hope you enjoy the book, and we hope that we can work together in spreading the message, what it's about, um, you know, and raise awareness of all of those who, especially now, are in positions where they could be taken advantage of by traffickers, by coyotes, and by all those who mean to do them harm. I'm going to pass it back to Tatiana in a second, who will begin a Q&A. Please post your questions in the Q&A section and we can answer them live. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hudson. And we would like to recognize our youth here for the incredible job they did in really speaking up for people who are in vulnerable situations, especially young people. I think we have run out of time for a Q&A because we're 8 minutes over, and we could maybe perhaps have a Q&A if others would like to remain. But first, as we close today's important conversation, I would like to invite final reflections and call to action from Marina Disklakova Parker from Vital Voices. Marina, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tatiana, and thank you, everybody. First of all, congratulations. This is such a rich discussion. I tried to capture as much as I could. It brought me back to my first experience, first encounter working with a survivor of trafficking, victim of trafficking, back in 1993 when I started the first helpline for battered women, and that's in Russia. And that's how I actually first heard stories of women who have been trafficked at that time, especially mostly into the prostitution, post sexual exploitation in different parts of the world, but also resilience and strength of survivors, how they go through that and how they come back with so much dignity, so much strength, incredible. And I will try to summarize within 3 main pillars as we address the issue of trafficking. But first, I want to say that in all of my over 30 years experience dealing with issues of gender-based violence, and including trafficking as one of the forms of gender-based violence, today I still feel that it keeps happening for the same reasons. It's allowed, it's acceptable, and we as humanity, and this is a big word, but unfortunately it's true, we need to look at ourselves and try to understand, why do we human beings do to other human beings what none of species on earth do? And why do we create such sophisticated systems to do that? Why do we still have systems that allow for such a horrible crime, and why we have so much resistance to stop it? And listening to all of you, to me, it's still in a culture, in toxic masculinity, all of that created by patriarchy. The framework of patriarchy is the main obstacle, because the way it's created, the whole thinking process, the process of implementation, the process of, at every level, awareness, culture, harmful practices, this is all parts of the same system. Now, what do we need to do? I will start with prosecution, and it is obvious that there are great laws that can be written, that can be passed. Unfortunately, they're not popular yet. And that's where the whole system that we have, the UN system, has to be used for advocacy, non-stop advocacy, but also accountability, keeping states accountable at not only drafting laws, not only passing, but effective implementation that includes every element, not only criminalization, but also rehabilitation, and everything that has to be done for victims of trafficking. It has to be done based on a survivor-centered approach, trauma-informed approach, and it has to include the main experts. The main experts are victims of trafficking. And again, thank you for blessing Jerome, Abner. I mean, thank you for all the voices, because this is how we know what's actually happening. And that's the only truth that we have. In terms of protection, protection has to be built again around survivor-centered approach, trauma-informed approach, and it has to be balance between criminalization, dealing with criminal system, and rehabilitation, reintegration. And I should say that it includes a lot of cultural shift, mentality shift. It includes a lot of it deepens in prevention. We cannot take one of those pillars because prevention is very deeply affecting mechanism on how protection and prosecution will be implemented. Now, today I've heard things that we all know that, for example, we need to find new ways of addressing it. We need to look at the language, how we describe it. We need to look at how youth is engaged and look at how technology that unfortunately is used by criminals can help us more, both in identifying and in raising awareness. In cultural shift, how do we address and how do we make it more evident that the way we have been going as humanity is no way to go forward, that we need to make change and rather soon. Prevention to me is also how we look at dignity, human value, because every survivor, every victim of gender-based violence and trafficking especially, speaks about dignity. But dignity is affected in so many ways because when it takes a lot of bravery even to speak about that after. I mean, I really like Blessing and Jerome, I really, really admire your strength to speak out and describe everything and explain to the benefit of so many others. Our collective action is to really continue pushing together with all the multilateral agencies, together with civil society. The role of civil society should be at the center, together with academics. As a sociologist who did a lot of research and used it for advocacy, I can tell that I think that's the only way that we can affect some of the patriarchal systems that are very mental, that don't want to believe. They will try to avoid taking action if they can. And that's where data comes as a very significant argument, and that gives great grounds for foundation and also foundation for policies and for advocacy. I hope I didn't miss most of amazing points that were made here. The discussion is actually, and all the material here, is really like for a whole day of conference, not for 2 hours. And Ruchira, thank you. And again, congratulations on the book. We've been going back many years, and I always admire what you do, your dedication, your strength, and how you keep pushing forward. So only all together, as everything, it takes a community. It takes every single member of a community, and it takes all of us. I represent a network, Vital Voices network of women activists like me who started something in their community, and there are over 50,000 women that we worked with in 180 countries. And each of them continue doing what we are speaking about today in different issues. I just last comment, there are so many contributing factors at the moment with climate migration, wars, conflicts that increase the risk of trafficking and the numbers in trafficking. And we also need to be aware of that and bring it to the attention when we speak intersectionally about all of those issues. And again, just thank you very much and congratulations to everybody.
Thank you, Marina, for putting all of the messages from every speaker into one strong message and bringing it into perspective. With that, I would like to once again thank APNIAP, Ruchira Gupta, and Hudson Hort for working hard to host this event. I would also like to recognize the co-hosts, UN Women, UNODC, Coalition Against Trafficking in Women, and Vital Voices, as well as organizations who supported this event, CAP International, NYU Center for Global Affairs, Teach, Train, Transform International, European Network of Migrant Women, UN Voluntary Trust Fund, as well as Mediators Beyond Borders. On behalf of all of us, thank you for showing up. May today mark not just a commemoration, but a commitment to listen, to act, to demand change, and to eradicate demand. Thank you and have a good rest of your day. And good luck with further events.
And a big
Thank you,
thank you
Marina.
to Tatiana, who worked so hard sitting in Kazakhstan, I think. What a superb
Tajikistan.
moderation. At Tajikistan. Thank you, Tatiana Kotlyarenko, for the wonderful moderation.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Everyone.